One thing you can't help but notice in the history of leadership and even the biblical stories about leadership is how many leaders got in prison. I have students watch some movies of leaders, and you've got Selma with Martin Luther King Jr., and you have Mandela, suffragette, dead man walking. So you just have this history of John the Baptist, Jesus, Paul, Peter, all imprisoned at some point. But then again, you also have morally bad leaders. You got Napoleon and Hitler and Elizabeth Holmes and Bernie Madoff also in prison. So it's not like prison itself is a badge of honor, that it's always a good thing. That's why you really need a moral framework to look at issues in leadership and make a judgment whether the cause is good, whether the means are good. It's not just the devotion to a cause. Generally, that's good, and getting in prison for it. So let's turn our attention, though, to the good leaders who were imprisoned. And basically, they didn't usually intend to get in prison. They were just speaking up on causes of justice that they noticed, and they wouldn't recant when push came to shove, and so they ended up in prison. It wasn't usually a big part of their strategy in terms of leadership. Later, maybe they would make decisions on when to get imprisoned, to bring light to or publicity to a cause, but that's not initially how they got into it. So one thing I just want to say is that it can happen that you run into this, that you get in trouble for doing what's right. Now, hopefully not. I mean, in Nazi Germany and in the Jim Crow South, in apartheid South Africa, those maybe increased your chance in the Roman Empire that you would get in trouble for doing what's right. Even in 1 Peter 3:13, Peter says, you're not going to get in trouble for doing what's right. Just do what's right. And then in the next sentence, verse 14, he says, but if you do, you'll be blessed for suffering for what's right. So, even there you see the ambivalence that in general, you're not seeking to provoke or get in trouble, but it may happen. So I think the other thing you really notice is that these people were all encouraged not to get involved in this stuff. We hear from the leadership literature to focus on doing the main thing that you can do well. What can you be the best in the world at? Stay focused, don't get distracted, be disciplined. But you see in these leaders actually them getting distracted to some extent by suffering, by injustice that they couldn't help but notice. And so they get involved in things kind of beyond their day job. So Martin Luther King Jr. gets distracted from his work as a pastor to get involved with this Birmingham bus boycott. So you see leaders kind of betraying that principle of discipline and focus. So that's just something to be aware of and to notice and to wonder about. That maybe there is a time for that. I really think that what leaders do is they help their organization focus on outsiders, focus on the suffering, focus on the clients, the customers, people you're trying to reach. And sometimes leaders take that a step further and say, there are even other issues that I notice beyond the scope of my organization that I'm currently working with, the group I'm currently working for. And one just final example of that is I think about Jesus' story about the Good Samaritan. And so the priest and the Levite both saw the guy hurting at the edge of the road, and they walked to the other side. They were focused on their day job, on their work for their organization, but they didn't take time to care for the suffering. And so I just noticed that, and I think that for leaders, there may be moral causes that come to our attention, the suffering, the injustice outside of our day job, and we may need to pay attention to that. Hopefully it doesn't lead to prison, but the fact that some of the people we admire, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Gandhis, the Bonhoeffers, did go to prison reminds us that there may be a time where we have to pay greater attention to the suffering, even though people tell us to stay in our lane and not get distracted by that, that it's not our fight. It may be our fight.